It started with a single letter taped to the front door, bold letters reading "Violation Notice." At first, the homeowner thought it was a mistake. But within weeks, the HOA's warnings turned into fines, threats, and something far darker. The community that was supposed to be peaceful became a battlefield of rules, power, and greed. Then came the day they crossed the line, when the HOA tried to take what wasn't theirs. That's when everything changed. Because this homeowner wasn't about to be bullied out of their own property, not without a fight. But what happens when the people enforcing the rules think they're above the law? For years, life on Willow Creek Lane felt like the picture of quiet perfection. Tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and rows of identical mailboxes that gleamed under the morning sun. The kind of place where neighbors waved. Kids rode bikes and every home looked plucked straight from a magazine cover. It was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about, one that promised safety, order, and belonging. When Daniel and his wife Melissa moved there, they believed they had found their forever home, 3 acres of open land at the very edge of the subdivision, a small buffer of peace between them and the rest of the world. Daniel, a former contractor, loved the space, the smell of cut grass, the way the morning light hit the porch, the simple joy of working the soil on weekends. He'd saved for years to buy that land, and every inch of it felt earned. The HOA brochure had looked harmless enough. Community standards protect your property value, it said. Together, we build a better neighborhood. It promised stability, shared upkeep, and respect for the rules. It didn't say anything about control. It didn't mention how those same rules could become weapons in the hands of the wrong people. In the beginning, the HOA board seemed friendly enough. Polite emails, cordial introductions, and annual meetings that felt more like small-town gatherings than business sessions. But beneath the smiles, there was something rigid about them. The president, a man named Richard Harlan, carried himself like a small-town mayor, always reminding residents how fortunate they were to live under such well-organized management. His favorite phrase was, "We don't want this neighborhood to lose its character." Daniel didn't think much of it. He kept to himself, paid his dues, and followed the rules. But little things began to stand out. New regulations appearing without warning, sudden changes to property lines in the HOA newsletter, and vague development proposals that no one seemed to remember voting on. Then one morning, Daniel noticed survey flags near the back of his property. Thin orange stakes hammered into the soil, marking lines that didn't make sense. At first, he assumed it was a mistake from the county assessor or a construction project nearby. But when he called the HOA, they brushed him off. "Just routine maintenance," they said. "We're verifying boundaries." Still, something about the tone felt wrong. Over the next few weeks, trucks started showing up. Men in reflective vests took measurements, drove metal poles into the ground, and marked out rectangular plots as if dividing up a puzzle. Daniel's land, the very edge of the neighborhood, suddenly became a point of interest. At the next HOA meeting, he asked about it. The room fell silent. Richard smiled that thin politician smile and said, "We're just exploring expansion opportunities. Nothing for you to worry about," but Daniel did worry. He knew property law. He'd built homes for a living. And the paperwork he'd signed when buying his land made one thing clear. The 3 acres were fully his, outside the HOA's development boundary. Still, he didn't want to start a war. He'd seen how neighbors who challenged the HOA became outcasts. Their grass measured, their fences cited, their mailboxes suddenly deemed non-compliant. So he stayed quiet. For a while. The tension built slowly, like pressure behind a dam. A few neighbors began whispering about new homes being planned on the east side, Daniel's side. Flyers went up about Phase 2 of Willow Creek expansion. The HOA called it progress. Daniel called it theft. Each day, the sound of engines and saws crept closer. Survey lines turned into trenches. The once peaceful field at the back of his property was now scarred with tire marks and machinery. Daniel contacted the county office only to discover that new plats had been submitted, plats that included his land. Someone had redrawn the maps, and the name listed on the new filings? Willow Creek Homeowners Association, Inc. That's when it hit him. This wasn't an accident. The HOA had somehow claimed his land on paper and was moving forward as if they owned it. The expansion plan wasn't theoretical anymore. It was happening. Neighbors congratulated him, thinking he'd sold his property for a generous payout. Others asked when construction would begin. Daniel said nothing. He was still processing the impossible. How something he'd worked his entire life for could be erased by a few lines on a document and a board vote he was never told about. That night, standing on his porch, he watched the lights from the bulldozers flicker across the field. He felt powerless, angry, and utterly alone. But deep down, a quiet resolve began to form. He didn't know how yet, but he would find a way to fight back. After all, this was still his land. And soon, the HOA would find out exactly what happens when you try to steal from the wrong person. The following weeks were a blur of noise, dust, and disbelief. The once quiet edges of Daniel's property had become a construction zone. Trucks rumbled down the road before sunrise. The air smelled of diesel and concrete dust. And every morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of drills and shouting men working just a few yards beyond what he still believed was his fence line. He tried to reason first. He called, emailed, even visited the HOA office in person, a small building tucked between the community pool and the clubhouse. Each time, he was met with the same polite but dismissive tone. "Everything's being handled properly, Mr. Hayes. We have the paperwork. You can rest easy." Rest easy. That phrase burned in his mind as he stood at the edge of his property. Watching men pour concrete on soil he had once plowed by hand, days turned into weeks, and the situation only grew stranger. He received a notice in the mail, a fine citing failure to comply with community development standards. According to the HOA, his undeveloped land was now designated construction property, and his obstruction of authorized development violated their bylaws. It was surreal. They were fining him for not allowing them to build on his land. When he refused to pay, more letters came, warnings of escalating penalties, legal fees, and potential liens. Daniel laughed the first time he read them, a hollow, bitter laugh. But as the envelope stacked up, the humor drained away. These people weren't bluffing. They truly believed, or wanted him to believe, that they had the right to do this. He began digging through his files, deeds, maps, closing statements, survey reports. Late nights turned into early mornings as he compared signatures, dates, and boundaries. Everything matched. His land was his and legally, undeniably. But when he tried to contact the county clerk to clarify what had happened, he was told the parcel had been reclassified as part of a development adjustment. No one could explain who authorized it. No one wanted to. Meanwhile, construction pressed on. What started as survey markers became concrete foundations. Within a month, the first frames were up. Rows of identical houses rose from the ground, sterile, perfect boxes that stretched farther into his property every day. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. Some avoided him entirely. Others whispered rumors, that he'd sold the land, that he was angry because the deal fell through, that he was causing trouble for the community. The HOA fed those stories quietly, ensuring that when Daniel finally fought back, he'd look like the villain. Then came the next escalation. One morning, Daniel woke to find orange tape strung across his driveway and a metal sign planted in his yard. Notice of easement, authorized construction zone. He tore it down immediately, his hands trembling. But when he drove into town that day, a deputy stopped him outside the subdivision entrance. The deputy, polite but firm, told him there had been a complaint that Daniel had interfered with active development property. They didn't arrest him. But the message was clear. Someone was trying to intimidate him into backing off. That night, Daniel sat on his porch in silence, watching the flicker of work lights across what used to be his open field. It felt like a bad dream, one he couldn't wake from. He wondered how many others had faced the same machine. How many ordinary people had been swallowed by paperwork, bylaws, and signatures they never signed. But Daniel wasn't like most people. He'd built homes, read contracts, dealt with inspectors. He knew systems, and he knew how to expose them. He started documenting everything. Photos, drone footage, audio recordings of HOA meetings, even the timestamps on construction trucks. He filed multiple public records requests with the county, and after weeks of waiting, he found what he was looking for: a discrepancy buried in the development filings. Someone had digitally copied his property's plat signature, his signature, onto a land reclassification agreement dated 2 years earlier. The document was fake. He printed it out, laid it next to his original deed, and felt a strange calm settle over him. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about principle. The next HOA meeting was different. The parking lot overflowed with cars. Daniel walked in holding a folder thick with documents. The room went silent when he entered. Richard Harlan stood at the podium, his usual smirk replaced with a tight, uneasy expression. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his tone rehearsed. "This isn't the time or place." Daniel interrupted him. Calmly, quietly, "I think it is." He handed copies of the forged paperwork to every board member in the room. Each page highlighted in yellow, each signature matched to his original. "This," he said, "is fraud. And it's signed under your organization's name." The room shifted, murmurs, whispers, uneasy glances. Richard tried to recover, dismissing it as a clerical error. But Daniel could see the sweat on his brow. He knew he'd struck a nerve.